as you all know, housing is an issue that I care a lot about. And so when I came across this story regarding Kushner's company, the Kushner family real estate company, and what they did to drive out tenants in rent-controlled buildings in New York, I had to jump on it. And I have to tell you guys about the details of this story because it is alarming, and this is something that is actually pretty widespread when it comes to rent-controlled buildings throughout the country. So let's dive right in. Now, back in 2015, Kushner's family business purchased a number of buildings in New York in gentrified areas or quickly gentrifying areas. So when the Kushner company or Kushner Co.'s bought 3 apartment buildings in the gentrifying neighborhood of Queens in 2015, most of the tenants were protected by special rules that prevent developers from pushing them out, raising rents, and turning a tidy profit. But that's exactly what the company, then run by Jared Kushner, did, and with remarkable speed. 2 years later, it sold all 3 buildings for $60 million, nearly 50% more than it paid. So what did they do to increase the rent of these units that were rent controlled? Well, first, let me quickly give you context and explain how rent control works. When you're living in a rent-controlled building, the landlord can only increase the rent by a tiny percentage each year. So you can't be surprised with a $500 rent increase, which, non-rent controlled buildings sometimes do have to deal with. So one thing that landlords sometimes do is make the conditions so uncomfortable that people decide to leave. And that's what appears to have happened in this case. Now, a clue has emerged as to how President Donald Trump's son-in-law's firm was able to move so fast. The Kushner Co.'s routinely filed false paperwork with the city declaring it had 0 rent-regulated tenants in dozens of its buildings across the city, when in fact it had hundreds. So they falsified documents. They said that they had none, 0 rent-controlled tenants or units in these buildings. For the 3 Queens buildings in the boroughs of the Astoria neighborhood, the Kushner Co.'s checked a box on construction permit applications in 2015 that indicated the buildings had 0 rent-regulated tenants. Tax records filed a few months later showed the company inherited as many as 94 rent-regulated units from the previous owner. So when you're applying for units to do construction, to renovate the building, they want to know whether or not you have rent-controlled tenants or units in that building because they want to make sure that you're not trying to make the living conditions so disruptive and so uncomfortable that you're trying to drive people out. They just straight out lied. And so then the construction begins. And it's uncomfortable, okay? So Kushner would never deny any tenant their due process rights. That's according to a statement by a representative. Obviously, that statement is a lie.
They've got their rights.
Okay, so here's what really happened. In all, Housing Rights Initiative, this is an organization that looks out for people who are renting, found the Kushner Co.'s filed at least 80 false applications for construction permits in 34 buildings across New York City from 2013 to 2016, all of them indicating there were no rent-regulated tenants. Instead, tax documents show there were more than 300 rent-regulated units, okay? Also, tax records show those rent-regulated units that numbered as many as 94 when Kushner took over fell to 25 by 2016. So all of a sudden, people are leaving, right? Why are people leaving? So they apply for these construction permits. They get the permits, which, by the way, again, they lied. And then they have workers, contractors, working on the buildings at all hours of the day, all hours of the night. So some of these tenants complained about how all of a sudden they see a huge number of rats in their building, right? Where do the rats all of a sudden come from? Then they start talking about how there's drilling above them at all hours of the day, all hours of the night. It's so incredibly uncomfortable that people start leaving. That is how they get rid of the rent-controlled tenants. And once someone leaves, then you can set the price for the unit at whatever you want. And that's how they were able to increase the rent and turn a tidy profit.
Yeah. But is there any reason to believe that the Kushner family would engage in these sorts of activities on purpose? I mean, they're in the White House, respectable family.
Oh, super respectable. I believe this story 100%. I mean, there was an investigation into this, and they found the evidence of how they lied in these documents to get those permits.
Yeah, it could be a lie. if I were Kushner, how I would defend myself was I would point out all of the times he's had to amend his documents when he entered the White House, where he'd forgotten about different businesses and things like that, and just say that he has some sort of terrible memory problem. And that's why you would forget 300 rent-controlled units. But yeah, as you say, I mean, this sort of thing, like his father, is a former felon. Like he engaged in these sorts of activities as well. Like he seems to have learned from it. I think it's not a coincidence that he took up with Donald Trump, another guy who's willing to engage in these sorts of behaviors or worse. As you've said, I don't think it's probably pretty rare across other companies as well. But now he made the mistake of moving into the White House and casting more of a spotlight on his company's activities.
But has he? Has he made a mistake?
Well, I mean, they're investigating it now.
Sure, they're investigating it, but I mean, we'll see what happens.
They need to fine them for all of these.
I find it, but that's the thing. A fine isn't good enough. I mean, he's
It's large
wealthy.
enough, it could
He'll
be.
pay the fine, whatever. He doesn't care. I mean, this is, in my opinion, criminal activity. You are pushing people out of their homes because you want to increase rent. You want to turn an even larger profit. I mean, this guy is already supposed to be tremendously wealthy, and he potentially destroyed the lives of all these people. They're living in New York. It is not a cheap place to live to begin with. Where are they going to go once they're pushed out of their rent-controlled units? So I want to read a few of the quotes by the tenants who experienced some of these incredibly disruptive living conditions. Rudolph Romano said the following: "It was noisy, there were complaints. I got mice, they cleaned the place out, I watched the whole building leave." Another tenant said, "All of a sudden there was drilling. You heard the drilling in the middle of the night. There were rats coming in from the abandoned building next door. The hallways were always filled with lumber and sawdust and plaster." Having gone through renovation recently, I know how incredibly annoying and difficult it is to live in those conditions. Obviously, I made the decision to live like that, to do the updates to our place, but these people
almost
didn't.
drove Christian out. Drilling all night long.
But this was
you
done.
in the living room.
This was done intentionally
Yeah.
to push these people out of their homes.
Yeah. I still think. I mean, I doubt that they're going to throw Kushner or the CEO in jail over this. I still think large fines is the way that you deal with this, both to potentially to get some money that could then be given to the people who are driven out based on interviews about why they left and all that. But again, if this is a decision that's being made based on the idea that if we drive these people out, we can make more money, and they see that the Kushner company had to pay gigantic fines, far more than they made by increased rents, then hopefully it will stop other companies from doing the same thing. But you need to make sure that you actually institute the fines.
So let's just quickly mention what the fines are, because they are not gigantic in the context of Kushner's firm. So according to New York law, submitting false documents to the city's Department of Buildings for construction permits is a misdemeanor, which can carry fines of up to $25,000.
Yeah, they should raise that.
They should raise that considerably. I think it should be more than a misdemeanor.
Well, and I assume that it probably does, but if it doesn't, it should, that if you do this a certain number of times, it should either definitely trigger higher scrutiny for future applications for construction and renovation, or possibly lose some sort of business license once you've done it enough times.
Absolutely.
If you want to get the whole Young Turks show every single day, become a member, tytnetwork.com/join. And once you do, you'll be saying,
I'm like a smart person.
or you might say,
I think it's weird.
or you might say,
Oops.
no, that won't be that one. It won't be that one. It'll be great, trust me. tytnetwork.com/join.